I'm presenting this paper on behalf of the first author, Sanam Lyastani, who unfortunately cannot be here to present his results herself. And as you can see, Sanam's work is about a systematic study of the consistency of 2FA user journeys. So let me start with the obvious question. Would you buy this bicycle? Yeah? So obviously this is a bicycle, but its design is very inconsistent from the bicycles that you probably are used to. And this inconsistency would force you to learn something new. And this learning something new could be a cognitive burden, a hurdle that in the end might deter you from actually going for this bicycle. And like this everyday example, striving for consistent user experience for websites is crucial to fit to the mental model of users or the mental models that users have built, and to not unnecessarily burden users with additional cognitive load or cognitive friction when you force them to learn something new to use your website. Now, this important best practice has been captured in Jacobs' law of internet user experience, which is one of several UX heuristics that is out there and drives the design of websites today. And this heuristic simply says that users expect your website to work exactly the same way as the other website that they already know and based on which they already built their mental models beforehand. Now, authentication is an important part of the user experience of websites today. And with the increasing adoption of 2FA by website developers, 2FA becomes part of this user experience. So the bottom line of this is, and this is just driving the research question of our work, is how consistent are the 2FA user journeys across different websites? And how easy would it be for users to transfer the experience and the knowledge they gained with 2FA in one website to another website? Now, to study this problem systematically, you would need a set of comparison factors that can capture the potentially diverse user journeys on the websites, and that allow you then to make a comparison between these journeys. So unfortunately, when we started this work, there was no such list of comparison factors available. So part of our work was to devise a methodology that allows us to derive a set of comparison factors from the user journeys on actual websites, and then use these comparison factors to compare these websites' journeys for consistency or the lack thereof. So in this talk, I will briefly go through this methodology, the individual steps here, before I then summarize some of our results and briefly discuss them. The first step of this journey is to actually collect a representative set of 2FA user journeys from real websites. To this end, two researchers independently explored the 2FA user journeys on various websites and screen recorded them, so make screencasts. This exploration was inspired or to some extent based on the literature. So there have been some recent works in the last years that studied individual parts of the user journey, and this allowed us to create a rough mapping of what is part of a user journey. So for this work, we were guided by this, and we have 5 basic steps that we explored. So how websites actually promote 2FA to the users, how the users can discover 2FA support on a website, how they educate and instruct users about their 2FA support, then a screencast or a recording of how you actually set up all the individual 2FA options, so TOTP apps or security keys, and how you use them during the login process for this particular website. And lastly, how to deactivate 2FA again on this website. Now, for this work, we need a representative sample of websites that have 2FA support. For that, we turned to the 2FA directory dataset. So this is a community-maintained list of websites that have different 2FA options supported. But because in the end, we had to rely on manual analysis of this user journey, the manual recording of these user journeys, we had to reduce the number of websites from this data set to something that is feasible for manual analysis. And here we relied on the Tranquil data set to rank these websites by popularity, and we selected the top ranked websites of the different categories that 2FA directory has. So for instance, retail, VPN websites, gaming, communication, etc. So in the end, we were able from this to record and analyze in the end the 2FA user journeys of 85 websites with 2FA support across 26 categories from 2FA directory. Now, the next step was to we used inductive research methods on this data set of collected user journeys to actually identify a list of potential comparison factors that we could use in our analysis step. So here we used completely emergent coding techniques like open and Excel coding. That means two researchers went separately to all the recorded user journeys and segmented them into meaningful parts and assigned code or multiple codes to the individual parts. And afterwards, in an Excel coding step, the researchers together used induction, deduction to derive or find categories, to combine this concept into categories, which we then also used in the end as our comparison factors. So to give you a very brief example, we might have websites that we have coded as they advertise 2FA prior to the account setup, for instance, on the landing pages. But you might also have websites that advertise or promote 2FA during or immediately after the account creation, for instance, nudging them to secure the account that they just created. And in the Excel coding step, in this concrete example, we combined this into the category promotion of 2FA. And this category also became one of the comparison factors that we identified. So overall, we identified 22 comparison factors across these 5 steps of our exploration. Each of these comparison factors either matches or not matches the user journey of a particular website. There's also a kind of middle ground if a website, for some of the comparison factors, if a website not entirely matches it, so they also be allowed this kind of quasi-matching. And during the coding process, we also found that there are functional dependencies between some of these factors. So some of those that are marked here in blue, this 8 in blue here, they might not even apply to a website. If they are applicable, depends if another factor has been at least quasi-matched or fully matched. So for instance, grouping the settings of 2FA makes only sense if the website actually supports multiple 2FA options that can be grouped in the first place. Putting this together gave us our final data set. That means for each user journey of these 85 websites, we represent the user journey encoded in this 22 comparison factors. And this is now our data set that allows us essentially to run our analysis. So for the sake of time, I will here briefly summarize some of the results from the paper, but I refer you to the paper for additional results, more elaborate discussions there, and also for the technical details, how we came to these results that I'm presenting now. So the first question for us was, of course, well, now that we have all these user journeys encoded, is there an overarching design pattern, something like a global consistency that we can say, okay, all the website developers that deploy 2FA, they followed kind of the same way. But our results show that websites in the user journeys are very kind of inconsistent. And maybe you noticed this already in this coding with the orange and green before. There was not high consistency in this picture. So there is no overarching design pattern that is followed by all websites across all factors. We also looked into individual factors. So if an individual factor is highly consistent, and we identified only 2 of them that are really consistent across all 85 websites. I will come back to these 2 factors in a second. Now, since there is no global consistency that we could find, of course, we were wondering, okay, are there clusters of websites that are similar to each other? And indeed, we could find this. So using standard clustering methods, we found that every website in our data set belonged to one of the 6 clusters here. And if you're in the same cluster, that means the user journeys look very similar according to our comparison factors. These factors, these clusters are different from each other in 3 aspects. How the websites actually instruct users about 2FA, how they support multiple 2FA options, and how is the strategy for device remembrance, meaning how they set, for instance, a cookie that you don't have to use 2FA on a subsequent login. And from this picture, you can see that in our data set, we didn't find any kind of predominant strategy that is end-to-end, also start to end for the entire user journey from discovery to deactivation, that kind of like dominates this landscape where you can say, okay, this is the majority. If you build a new 2FA journey, follow this majority, for instance, to be consistent with most of them. Additionally, to this data exploration, we also could do a qualitative data analysis. So during this coding process, we gained experience, things that we noticed, how websites are doing certain steps along the user journey. And I want to present 2 of these results from this qualitative data analysis from this discussion of this website's user journey. The first one is, what we notice is there is a high consistency when it comes only to the discovery part of this user journey, but for self-motivated users. So there's 2 factors I mentioned earlier that are highly consistent across all websites. They're both located in the discovery phase. So website developers agree on that 2FA is an optional feature. Only 6 websites on our dataset mandated 2FA. And they agree very much on how to call 2FA in the settings and where to find it in the account settings of the user. And the vast majority of websites also abstain from nudging or promoting 2FA really to the user prior or before, during, or after account creation. This is why we say for self-motivated users, so we have a very consistent experience as a user if you are self-motivated to actually look for 2FA in the first place. As a counterexample, the part of the user journey that we found to be extremely inconsistent was the configuration and the setup of the 2FA options. So really like, for instance, registering a TOTP app or security key. So here we see really even split strategies across these websites. So we, for instance, notice that there's an even split between the strategy of actually only offering a single 2FA option in the first place to users. A third of the websites also offers multiple options to be set up, but only one of them can be actually used to log in. The rest is configured but not usable unless you switch. Or offering multiple options and also allowing the user to choose between these options during login, depending on which device, for instance, they're using at this moment. We also saw an even split, half-half here, between, for instance, the strategy to enforce a certain 2FA option. That means only after you set up SMS-based two-factor authentication, you could set up further options. Or the other half of the websites, they immediately allow you to set up whatever you want, or whatever they support. Now, before I will conclude this talk, I want to very briefly discuss the methodology that we have introduced here and our results. So first of all, consistency as the heuristic state is kind of important to provide a good user experience, but consistency by itself and alone does not guarantee a good user experience. It's just part of it, right, of the strategy. In our data set, for instance, we saw that, for instance, certain design patterns are a little bit more consistent, but they actually followed a design that recent literature, for instance, by Golla or Lassac, has identified as problematic for usability. An interesting outlier actually in our data set is iCloud. So iCloud actually, when compared to other websites, according to our methodology, is really different in the user journey, how they handle this. And this, of course, raises the question now, is iCloud the way to go and the other websites should adopt? Or is there anything specific about setting the context of iCloud that users basically accept this flow here that is so different from what they have on other websites? I should note that in this work, we did not attempt to give any kind of quality measurement to individual factors or the overall UX. So we have this quasi-match and so on, but there's no quality measurement where we say, oh, a website that matches fully here is better in its usability than something else. It's really just they do it according to some way it matches. So we think future work, for instance, could combine this kind of methodology, like overall UX of the entire user journey with this individual quality or studies of individual quality here, or the overall quality. As a qualitative data study, we of course have our certain limitations. So first of all, there is of course a subject bias by the involved researchers. So how we explored the websites, how in the Excel coding, for instance, we came to our comparison factors. So there might be a bias by our researcher for us. The data set that we used is heavily skewed towards the top-ranked websites in English language. So we cannot say that this generalizes to the long tail or to specific regions in the world. We did this recording and measurement on a desktop client with a fixed setup in terms of internet and so forth and software configuration from Germany in a period in 2021. So there have been some policy changes, for instance, on GitHub, Twitter, or Google recently. So our data set might not necessarily, or does not necessarily present latest state of 2FA out there. But I think overall our results are still valid. I would argue about this. And lastly, We only looked at the user journeys like from account creation, initial 2FA setup to deactivation. We did not go into a longitudinal monitoring of the accounts or, for instance, recovery steps. And with that, I'm already coming to the conclusion. So in this paper, we contributed a methodology to compare the 2FA user journeys across different websites by identifying these comparison factors, and we also studied the consistency. Our results show that there's no incumbent, consistent start-to-end design for the 2FA user journey that websites follows, but rather it's like the ecosystem seems to be clustered at the moment, and only very few individual factors showed high consistency across the entire data set. And from that, I think there's a good way forward, a call to action for further research, and also creating, for instance, guidelines, recommendations for 2FA implementers. So the most obvious way forward is, of course, taking this kind of as an inspiration and go towards user and developer studies. So why did developers actually deploy a certain journey, a certain strategy on their website? Does this have to be contextualized? Are there maybe regulations like PCI DSS or so in play, or website categories that influence this, or just financial problems or issues? And for the user, of course, which of these design patterns is, for instance, a possible gold standard, or which part of the user journey are the most influential ones for good usability? And lastly, of course, taking this methodology and applying it to different settings, like, for instance, a mobile setting, newer technologies like passkeys, or also including, for instance, account recovery journeys into the methodology would be a step forward. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I have on backup slides.
Hi, Jacob Abbott from Indiana University. So when you were looking at the two-factor authentication from all these different sites, were there any specific methods for the two-factor authentications that you specifically looked at, whether it was push notifications, SMS, text messages, or any of these factors that you saw that were in identifiable clusters or that were specifically offered in the applications on those websites?
So during the exploration, we essentially just used whatever the website provided. We did not specifically encode this in our data set and say, okay, this is an additional thing that we could use for clustering, to say, okay, everyone who's in cluster one are the website that only use SMS, for instance. So we didn't go to this extent. It would be an interesting thing, but since 2FA directory would allow us to kind of combine our data sets here and go in this direction. But for the exploration, really, we were just interested in getting an overview of the entire journey, triggering whatever was there. So if they offered 5 options, we configured 5 options and used them for login, and went to the tutorials and the instructions how to set them up, so to really document like full coverage documentation. But we did not go in this direction that we combine this in the clustering part, for instance, or consistency analysis. But it would be a great thing, actually, great idea to look into this.